Welcome to Gas Station Business 101 podcast. I'm your host, Shabir Hossain, and this is episode number 19.
Welcome to the one and only Gas Station Business 101 podcast, where you can learn all the secrets about how to start and operate a gas station business successfully and make money. This podcast is brought to you by the good folks at CSB Academy Publishing Company. And now, here is your host, Shabir Hossain.
Hello. Once again, welcome to episode number 19. It's been a while since I produced an episode, and once again, my sincere apology, because my plan originally was to produce at least one episode every week, and last month, and starting of this month, I have been slow to doing so. And in last episode, I mentioned the reason for this delay is a business that we recently acquired and some of the issues that we're trying to handle and solve. And there are things, promotional things and other things that we're trying on that business or in that business. And I promised you the results that I will be sharing with you. And again, it is still somewhat premature for me to share anything at this point, because it has not been long enough for me to share any of that results. So we will touch on that progress in a future episode. But today, I want to share something very important. And I know in a previous episode where we discussed buying process of a gas station, I know we touched on some of these briefly, but the topic today is the closing checklist that you must check off before buying a gas station. And I will discuss 8-step process or 8 checklists that you need to check off. It is very important that you follow this checklist because it can save you thousands of dollars at the end of the day. So let's assume that you found a business that you liked and you negotiate with the seller, and I'm assuming you negotiated with the seller and you fixed a price that this is the number you're both comfortable with. And once you get through those steps, then comes a time where you and the seller decide a time and a day to close the deal. Meaning, closing essentially means either if you're buying with a real estate, you go to a closing company, sign off on all the legal documents and the bank loans and whatever and whatnot. But if you're buying a lease, you still sign some kind of a lease agreement, some purchase agreement. And more importantly, the physical closing takes place at the location where a company that counts inventory for living, they come in with their counting machine. Those number, it looks like a big calculator rather, and they count whatever merchandise is on the shelf. And then you figure out how much inventory there is at the store, and you figure out a cost of that inventory, and you pay the seller, and then you officially take over their business. So in a loose term, in a broader sense, that is what exactly happens when you take over a business. And again, as I said, I'm assuming that you found a business, you decided what the price you're going to pay, and the seller agreed. And then you decided on a closing date, and you went to the store and did the inventory count and found out how much money that inventory cost, and then you write a check or pay however way you pay and you sign the lease at the same time and whatever agreement there is, and you officially become the new business owner of that business. But our concentration today would not be any other items of that other than the actual physical closing of that business. Mostly the day you take over, the inventory that you count, and the transaction that takes place. The reason I'm stressing over this because we again, for the 25th or 28th time, I again just went through this closing once again. As I mentioned in my very first episode, that I have bought, sold, and transferred many businesses, and I'm assuming it's over 25 right now. And every closing always is a little bit different than the previous one. And there are always something different that comes up and surprises me. And there are some ways that a lot of times the buyer can be taken or can get taken by the seller, either intentionally or unintentionally. But all of these can cost the buyer quite a bit of money at some point. So it is important that I summarized the errors, the issues that I have had over the years taking over businesses, and I summarized it. So I want to share that with you today. That way it will at least save you some money and not make the mistakes that I have made over the years. So let's go through this checklist and I will explain each and every item in detail. But after listening to this episode, and if you're about to buy a business, and if you have any questions or concerns that I did not address, please feel free to email me or go to my website. You can post a comment on the blog, or you can go to the tab where it says Ask Me on my blog at gasstationbusiness101.com and just post a question there. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Number one is check the merchandise pricing and make sure they're not out of range. I have had many problems with this. Many sellers tend to reprice their merchandise, and it is not a fair practice. It is not something very ethical either. But there are sellers that will take a pricing gun, and 2 days before you buy the business or a day before you buy the business, they go in and they start pricing different items at a higher price. So when the people from inventory companies counting, they're going to count it at a higher price. So let's say if on a candy aisle, there are two types of candy, and there are regular size and king size. And typically, let's say a store sells a regular size at $1.19 and king size at $1.99. And again, I'm not saying these are the numbers for every store. I'm just giving an example, and these are some numbers. You don't have to price candy the way I'm quoting here. But let's say it's $1.19 at $1.99. And if they have 200 boxes of these candies, let's say, assume that if you count those 200 boxes on the shelf for $1.19 at $1.99, your total comes up to $3,500 for the total candy shelf. Now, if the seller comes in and prices that regular size candy bar at $1.29 and $2.09 respectively, then all of a sudden that $3,200 becomes, let's say, $3,900 or $3,700. See, this is a problem, definitely. But my point is, you need to, let's say, when you're looking at that business, make sure to take some notes. If you recall in previous episodes, I said whenever you are looking at prospective business to buy, make sure you take plenty of notes. And one of these notes should be, write down some of these prices, what they sell it for. So at the time of closing, let's say 2 days before closing, you come to the store, so you don't get surprised seeing that, hey, that same candy bar that was $1.19 a week and a half or 2 weeks ago is right now at $1.39 or $1.49. That means somebody's trying to take advantage of you. Similarly, you need to check tobacco, cigarettes, and other grocery items just to make sure you're keeping the seller honest. And if you see any discrepancy, just not on one item. If you see one item, it could be an error, it could be something different. But if you see a consistent basis changes on pricing, make sure you address it with the seller and be polite and just tell them, hey, 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago, your prices were this. And all of a sudden, 2 days before closing, your prices went up. So make sure you address that, and that way they will know that you noticed and they may rectify it, or you need to sit down with him and talk to him and say, listen, we need to rectify this before I go to closing, because I will not pay you higher prices just because you're posting higher prices than what you did before. So that is very important. And here, some people can get taken for thousands of dollars just on this thing, because a typical store holds anywhere from $50,000 to $80,000 worth of inventory. So any price adjustment by 10, 15, 20 cents can add up into thousands. So be very careful about this and make sure you check those prices. Number 2 is negotiate the retail to cost percentage of the inventory that you will be paying to the seller. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's say your candy bar, your inventory company is counting at $1.19. Does that mean you pay the seller $1.19 for that candy bar? No. You pay the seller the cost of that candy bar. Now, it is very hard to accurately calculate all those 2,000 items that a store carries and come up with the exact cost of that item. But the idea is, when you do the inventory count, ideally you should be paying as close to cost as possible, so it is fair to you and to the seller. The seller bought those merchandise for resale. Now you're taking over that business, so you should reimburse the seller for whatever he or she has paid for that inventory. And since, as I said, there are 2,000 items, so you can't go through every invoice and say, okay, this price was $1.79, this price was 79 cents, they have 5 of these. It will take days to do that. Most of the time, that's why most gas station changeovers, they do it in a typically standard manner of taking a percentage off the retail cost, and they say, as long as the seller and the buyers are comfortable with that percentage, they go with that. For example, if buyer and seller agrees that whatever merchandise that the inventory company has counted, let's say they counted $60,000 worth of sellable merchandise, and both buyer and seller agreed that, hey, we will do the changeover at 27% cost. Meaning, there are some items, if you recall from previous episodes, I gave some percentage on some of the departments. For example, soda is right around 35%, motor oil is about 50%, cigarette is about 17%, tobacco is about 21%, beer is about 22%, and so on and so forth. And again, it's not standard for every store. I'm throwing out these numbers just as an example. But your store or your area may show higher or lower percentage depending on what store it is and how they're pricing their merchandise. But one way to figure this out is by sitting down with the seller and seeing some of their invoices to see how much margin they have on their beer, how much margin they have on their wine, how much margin they have on their grocery items, and then cigarette, beer, and so on and so forth. And then say, okay, will you be comfortable if we take an average and do, let's say, from 17% to 50%, let's say the average is 25 or 27 or 29, whatever buyer and seller both are comfortable at, that's where it should be. But as a buyer, your goal would be to make that percentage number go higher. That way you pay less. So let's say if it's a $100,000 inventory and you've decided to do it at 25%, that means you will end up paying the seller, $75,000. But for that same $100,000 inventory, if you can talk the seller into doing at 30%, you will only be paying the seller $70,000. So here you will be saving $5,000. But it's not that easy. You can't just say tell the seller, hey, let's do it at 30, and he would agree. Most likely not. But in the event that you calculate that his profit margin or her profit margin is much higher than 25% on average, then you have to come up with those reasoning, show them those numbers, and then try to convince them that, hey, if I pay you 25%, then I'm the one who's losing money, not you, because your cost is much lower than what you're asking. So let's find a common ground and settle in the middle somewhere where nobody is gaining too much, nobody is losing too much. Now, number 3, meet the employees and explain to them what is taking place. This is very vital. And the reason I say it is very vital, because I've seen stores where the day we came in, took over, all of the employees got up and left. And it is not because they didn't like us, but a lot of the times they did not know what is taking place. They felt vulnerable, and some of them already knew that the store was being sold, so they found other jobs and left the day we took over. So it is very important that you meet with those employees with the permission of the seller at least 2 days prior to you taking over, and explain to them what is taking place and how nothing will change on their part, meaning they will continue to do their work and they will continue to get paid the same rate as they've been getting paid. What I usually do is I have a small meeting where I introduce myself and tell them that whatever they're getting paid, and I would get that from the seller or his accountant, and I'll continue to honor that rate. And whoever is paying, let's say, recently I had an incident where, I had one situation where one of the employees said he has been there for many years, and I honored that, and he was getting paid higher than any other employees because he has been there for a while. And I honored that, and I kept him at that rate and explained to him that if he stays and does the good job that he has been doing, he will continue to get raise. Because, as I mentioned before, employees are the key to your success. Always remember that. You could have the best merchandise, the cheapest price, but if you don't have good employees behind that counter, most likely you will not be very successful. So it is important to have some good employees. And I always recommend, even if you have some people in mind that you're thinking about bringing in to your new business, try to keep some of these old employees because they already know the clientele, they're familiar with the store, and too many changes in one business at once is not a very good thing. So let's say you bought the business, you fired everybody else, and then you brought in a new set of clients. The people that are used to coming into this store all of a sudden will be at shock. They're coming in, seeing new faces, then they find out it's been sold and this is a new owner. Automatically they think, or they will think, that you're a monster because you fired everybody. So even if you need to bring your own people and get rid of the people that are already there, my suggestion is do it slowly. Take your time doing it. And in the meantime, you may find 1 or 2 or 3 of these employees are very good, and you may not have to fire them. You may not have to separate them from their job. They may be doing an excellent job for you. So give them a chance and explain to them what is taking place. It will save you a lot of headache at the day of closing, because the last thing you want at the day of closing is your employees walking away from the store. Number 4, plan with the seller for transfer of all regulatory licenses. And I have seen this over and over where it became a huge problem. If you recall from previous episodes where we spoke about licensing and all regulations, there are some licenses in some states, some cities, and some localities where you would need the consent of the seller. For example, in Alabama, the liquor license has to be signed off by the seller. So when you're applying for the liquor license, the regulatory board that handles the liquor license in Alabama is called the ABC board, Alabama Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. And what they say is you're not applying for a new license. Instead, you're applying for a transfer of the existing license. So in order for you to be able to transfer that license, the previous owner has to sign off on that application. So that means your seller has to help you transfer some of these licenses. So it is a good idea to sit down with the seller 2 or 3 days prior to you taking over and finding out what all licenses there are for your city and your state, and gather up all the documents, all the applications, and fill out whatever you need to fill out, and make sure that if there is a room for the seller to sign off on, let them sign off on. Number 5, similar to what we just talked about as far as regulatory licenses. Number 5 is transferring all the utilities under your company name. And again, for you to be able to do this, you still need the seller's help. For example, phone lines. If you're with AT&T, most of these commercial phone lines are with AT&T, I know, unless you go with some other cable company, or there are many other companies, but the main company that all the other companies lease these lines from, or the numbers from, is AT&T, because they are the biggest player in this game. And they have a requirement where if it is a commercial phone line, if it is a business phone line, they will not let you transfer that existing number to your name without the seller's consent. And usually what they do is they send you or fax you or email you a form that you need to fill out, where the seller has to sign and you have to sign, and then you have to notarize that, and then you send it off to them and they approve it. That's when they transfer the phone number to your name. Now, if the seller doesn't agree to transfer that phone number, you may end up have to getting a new phone number. And business phone numbers are very important because they're published in Yellow Pages and other places where people know if it is a tax sequestration on the corner of Main and First, the number is this, because they call and they ask for if you have this or if you have that. Gas station business phone numbers are very important to keep the same, because those numbers have been listed for a long time. And people use those numbers to call you for various reasons. And so it is important for you to have the seller sign off and help you transfer those utilities. Similarly, power company, water company, and natural gas company, they may want the seller's acknowledgement that the account has been transferred to a new ownership. So it is vital that you sit down at least 2 days prior to you taking over and going through a checklist of all the utility companies. And as I said before, all the licenses, very important. Once you find out those licenses, get those applications, fill those out, see where you need signature from the seller or from the landlord. Because if you're leasing a station, I'm sure that the seller has taken you to the landlord and you have agreed and signed up on some documents. Make sure you go to the landlord, have them sign off on these applications, because there are some applications on licenses where it needs a signature from the landlord as well. So make sure to do this prior to you taking over, because the day you take over a new business, there are a lot of other issues that you have to deal with. And the last thing you would want to do is run over to the water department or to the power company or to the licensing places to get those. I want you to get those done beforehand. And some of these licenses, you may not be able to get it 2 days prior to taking over, but at least as long as you have the application filled out and everything else set up, you can take that application the next day after you take over your business and everything is running smoothly. You can run around, do those things. But make sure you set things up beforehand and you have a folder for each and every one of them, and you know exactly what they may ask when you go to transfer, and you have those documents in place. Because for example, in liquor license and some of the business licenses, they need a lot of documents. It's not just that application filled out. They may need your corporate article, they may need your EIN number, your bank account number, and quite a few other copies of documents for like Social Security, your birth certificate, and whatever and whatnot. So make sure you have those in place before you do the closing. Number 6, notifying all vendors about the changeover. This is very important in one reason. I have seen many times the day we took over a business, a vendor comes in. For example, it could be Frito-Lay, could be Coke, could be Pepsi, could be Budweiser, and says, Oh, there's a new ownership change. We did not set up a new account, so I can't deliver the product to you today. So it is once again, very important that you ask the seller to have you meet some of these vendors so you can give them your information. And one good way to give out your information is have it ready. What I usually do is I print out a document, a simple document. You can go to any Word file or Microsoft Word or anywhere and type up few simple items. For example, your company name, your DBA name, doing business as, and most likely, most of the time, if you're buying an existing business, you're keeping that same old DBA. So let's say ABC Food Mart, and you just say, my company name is this, LLC, and DBA is ABC Food Mart, then business address, and then mailing address. If you have a separate mailing address, for example, a post office box or something else, or your home address, you put that in there as mailing address. And then you put the store phone number and your phone number. Then you put your owner's information, meaning your name and your phone number, and then the two vital information that every vendor wants. One is your reseller's tax ID number, and it could be a document that you can obtain from the Department of Revenue of the state that you're in. And other last item they want is your EIN number, which is your employer's identification number. This number you can get from the IRS. This is essentially the social security number for your business. So these are the items, these are the information that most vendors want from a new ownership, which is the name of the business, the name of their corporation, their EIN number, their owner's name, the owner's contact information, and reseller's tax ID. And to make it more official, most vendors want a copy of your reseller's tax identification number. Means the document that you receive from your Department of Revenue from your state, they want a copy of it. So once you fill out this few information on a piece of paper, print out 20 copies of this and attach one copy of your reseller's tax ID and attach those two and staple them. And this way, when you meet the vendors, hand them one of these, because this is what they need. They need to see that you're authorized to you're authorized to buy without sales tax, and you will be selling it and charging people sales tax. So for you to be able to do that, you have to have a reseller's tax ID number. In the event they don't have a reseller's tax ID, some of these companies will deliver product to you, but they will charge you sales tax. And it is hard to get that money back. For example, if you bought $1,000 worth of beer or Coke, and in your city, your state, there is 10% sales tax, you just paid $100 to that company as a sales tax, which you may not get back. So it is important for you to provide them with a copy of reseller's tax ID and your information so they can go ahead and set up your account ahead of time. And the day you take over, it's again a smooth transition. Any vendor comes in, they already know what has taken place, and they will deliver the product without charging you sales tax, or even worse, refusing to deliver to your store. And worst thing you can have is the day you take over, you're out of products, you're out of merchandise, because the vendors came in and refused to deliver product to you because you do not have an open account with them. So be very careful and ask the seller to have you meet with some of these vendors. If not, at least ask him to pass on your information to the vendors so vendors can go ahead and set up all your accounts ahead of time. That way, the day you take over, again, smooth transition. Number 7, identifying all unsellable merchandise at the closing day. The reason I'm mentioning this because I have come across this many times, as recently as last month. Every store, when I go to do the inventory, let's say the day of closing, I often find merchandise that are out of date. And the inventory company that counts this merchandise, they don't look at the date because they don't have the time. You're not paying them enough for them to look at every product and see if these are outdated products or not. They just look at the price and count. My suggestion to you is the day of closing, show up an hour ahead of time. Let's say if you're closing at 6 a.m., go there at 5 or 4:30. Walk through the aisles and the back room and see if you can find beer, soda, chips, other grocery items that are out of date. And you may ask, how do I find out what is out of date? How can I read the date? Well, most of them are very easy to read, trust me or not. Even on some of the beer, they list usually the month first and then the day and the year, or some of them just list the month and the year. And most of the chips, cookies, candy has a date on them. So make sure, I don't want you to go through each and every item. If anything looks a little bit worn out or a little bit old, flip them over. Make sure they're not out of date. Because every time we change over a store, I usually end up buying anywhere from $1,500 to about $3,000 worth of unsellable, outdated products, which nobody will take back, for example. And again, I'm not talking about Frito-Lay chips or Coke or Pepsi, but there are other items that are more expensive and you cannot return them. Usually Pepsi, Coke, and Frito-Lay, Golden Flake, they take care of their own product. If they're out of date, they'll take it back and they will replace it with the new items. But there are items that you cannot send back. For example, cigarettes. The most expensive item you carry in your store is cigarettes. Cigarettes cannot be sent back. If you mistakenly order cigarettes that do not sell, you will be sitting on it for years to come, and then you may have to just throw it away. Cigarette companies do not take cigarettes back. They used to, but the law has changed in some different ways, which doesn't benefit the retailers. So every store I have taken over, I have noticed that there are at least $700-800 worth of cigarettes that are not sellable because they're too old. They're 2-3 years old, and they're the type that nobody wants to buy. If you can identify some of these things, you may want to point out to the seller and say, listen, I can't buy this because nobody will buy this from me. Plus, these are out of date. So can you take them with you? Or can you, if the seller has other stores, request to him, see if he can transfer those to any other stores of his. As I said, I have been taken to the cleaner pretty much at times with this unsellable, out-of-date products. As recently as last month, where we have paid about $1,500 for some of these cigarettes and other items that I simply had to throw away. It's like throwing your $100 bills out the window and feeling pain in your heart. So make sure to read some of these dates and make sure that you know what you're buying. As I said, pay special attention to cigarettes. And if you know anything about cigarettes, there are some brands that do not sell anymore. If you do not know about cigarettes, ask a friend that has this type of business. Ask for their advice. For example, there are cigarettes like Benson & Hedges. In most cities, most towns, and most states, they don't sell anymore. And if you see a store that you're buying has 10 cartons of Benson & Hedges menthol, most likely you will be stuck with them for years to come. And those cigarettes cost about, depending on, again, where you're located at, may cost you $50, $60, $70, $80, as up as $100 a carton. And 10 of those can cost you almost $1,000 that you'll be stuck with. So these are the things I want you to pay very close attention to and make sure you don't get taken, and learn from my mistake and save some money. Number 8, follow proper inventory counting process. And I think I just touched on how to identify the merchandise that are out of date or not sellable, unsellable, and whatnot. But there is a process of doing inventory, the right way to do inventory. And the company you hire, a lot of times, may be in a hurry and may not follow all the process and the procedures. But the way to do it is you need to do inventory either at the end of the night or very early. You do not want to do inventory in the middle of the day. And for me, ideally, I prefer to close the store and I hang a sign on the window or the door that says close for inventory for 2 hours. It usually takes anywhere from 2 to 3 hours to do the inventory depending on the size of your store. But the best thing to do is close the door, close the store, and ask the seller to have his or her cashier close out the register, meaning they need to just day close out the register, meaning take a final report and close out the register like they're closing for the whole day. And that way, you will have a fresh start and they will have a reading as to how much they sold and whatnot. And you will have a fresh start and nobody is coming in and out to buy anything else. So you can do the inventory uninterrupted. But more importantly, this way, if it is a gas station, then you need to go out and take a reading, physical reading of those tanks. Most of the stores nowadays have a machine called Veeder-Root or gas monitoring system of some sort that can print out a report, and which report tells you how many inches of regular gasoline versus how many inches of plus or premium or diesel fuel is in that store. But I still prefer to go and measure the tank with the measuring stick that most of the stores still has. The older methods, the older way of measuring fuel, which is by a measuring stick. And the reason is gas is gold. It is very expensive. So if those new devices, the Veeder-Root and those type of machines that monitors and measures your fuel is little off, their probes, the probes that monitor those fuel are little off, you can be out of hundreds of dollars, not thousands, but hundreds of dollars. So it is a good idea to match that printout with your stick reading. Make sure to use some paste, coloring paste. There are some coloring paste that if you put it on a stick and then stick that device, or not the device, the wooden stick into the tank, whenever that paste touches the gasoline, it changes color. So you can exactly say this tank has 22 inches of fuel. And then most of these sellers or most gas station owners have a tank chart where the tank chart explains 22 inches equals to 3,200 gallons or 4,500 gallons, depending on the tank chart. You need to make sure you cross-reference that, because as I said, I have seen Veeder-Root give out false reading more often than I can count. So it is a good idea to take the Veeder-Root reading and then go measure the tank physically and match it and see if there is any difference. If there is a difference, go with the stick reading and not with the Veeder-Root reading, because you physically measured the tank, so you know exactly how much fuel is there. And remember, if you're making a mistake by an inch, that 1 inch can mean about 100 to 200 gallons, and the 200 gallons can cost anywhere from $200 to $600. So be very careful to read how many inches of gasoline there is. And if you do this very early in the morning, then you don't have very much crowd. Nobody's in the parking lot. You can do it without much of interruption. And since this is the most vital part of your business buying process, I want you to be calm and collective. That way you can do all this calculation in a cool mind and not make mistakes. Because as I said, any small mistake can cost thousands of dollars. So once you measure this gas or fuel, make sure you tell those inventory people to take their time and make sure not to guess and count each and every item. And once you see they're finishing off with a section, mark that section saying counted. So you make sure that nobody else counts that again by mistake. See, when I've seen this happen many times where when inventory has been counted, that company brings in 2 to 3 people with them. And let's say one guy is finishing off on the grocery aisle, but he forgets to mark that area as counted. And then he goes into the cooler to count beer or soda or whatever and whatnot. And the other lady or guy was counting cigarettes, and all of a sudden they come count the chips, and then they move on to the grocery aisle again and count the same thing once again. So if that mistake takes place, again, it can cost thousands of dollars because you paid twice for the same merchandise. So it is vital that you walk and watch, see what they're doing, what they're finishing off, and ask them to mark that area as counted, or you can just write in a piece of paper that counted and hang it on that shelf so nobody else goes and counts that shelf. It's not that hard. So just make sure you have some way to mark what has been counted and what has not. And you can guide the other people that are working and say, hey, listen, this area has been counted already, so you need to move on to the other one. So mistakes like this can cost a lot of money. And that's why it has to be done when the business is not at a busy time. Plus, nobody's walking in and out and the registers are not running. I know a lot of sellers say, let the register run. That way we'll gather some more sales. My suggestion is, do not worry about that sales. Close the register down. Make sure to have everybody leave the store, meaning no customer inside the store, and just concentrate on counting the inventory. Now, the last part of counting inventory is supply. Supply is something that oftentimes don't get counted when inventory is being counted, but I'm sure the seller will want you to count supply, but make sure to count supply at cost. And when I mean supply, I mean the coffee beans, the syrup for the fountain machines, the cups for the fountain machines, the cups for the coffee. These items needs to be counted at cost and not at retail. And the difference can be huge. To give you an example, one time we bought a store that had 2,000 32-ounce Pepsi or Coke cups for drinks, for fountain drinks. And the seller had the inventory people counted those 2,000 cups at retail, meaning they said, listen, we sell each 32-ounce cup of soda at $1.29. So these 2,000 cups will be counted as 2,000 times $1.29, when the cups were only costing 11 cents a piece. But they said, no, we will count them at retail. And we ended up in an argument and couldn't settle it. It was a big company, and we ended up paying, I believe it was about $3,700 extra than what we anticipated of paying. So make sure to count supplies at cost and no other way. If the seller insists, tell them you cannot do this because it has to be counted at cost. So any supply has to be counted at cost. If not, you will be taken big time. So once again, to recap, do it when the store is not running. Make sure to do it at night, late night, or very early in the morning. Make sure to check off any area that has been counted and mark it as counted. Make sure to check the gas reading physically. Do not rely on those machines that prints out the numbers, how many gallons it has in the tank. Make sure to cross-reference that with physical tank measure. And once you do that, you will be in safe side, knowing whatever checks you're writing to the seller is accurate, is for what you should be paying for and not a penny extra. We are at the end of today's episode, and I will not answer any email in today's episode because I have been busy and haven't had a chance to answer most of these emails that I've received. I did not even get a chance to go through with them. So today, I would again want to recommend a book that I loved and read recently. And the book is called The School of Greatness, a real-world guide to living bigger, loving deeper, and living a legacy by Lewis Howes. And this book, I think you will enjoy because it's about a guy that is down and out on his luck. And then suddenly he started researching different people that are very successful. And himself, transforming himself to become a very successful business person online. Again, this is not somebody who did offline business like what we discuss in this episodes, but he did online business. And in a future episode, I would like to discuss some online business ideas with you. So that is one reason I want you to read this book, so you can get some ideas on how people can make money online as well as offline. And I believe you will enjoy reading his book. He's a very famous person. His name is Lewis Howes. He even has an podcast show. I'm not sure if he is still doing it, but I've heard few of his episodes, and he's a great guy. So I know you will enjoy it. And in the show note, I will have a link to this book. So until next time, take good care of yourself, and hope I was able to add some value to your business by providing some of this checklist, and I hope you follow those checklists when you buy your next business. So take care, and I will see you next week with a new episode.
This has been the one and only Gas Station Business 101 podcast with your host, Shabir Hossein. This podcast was brought to you by CSB Academy Publishing Company. Be sure to join us next time as we share with you the secrets about how to start and operate a gas station business successfully and make money.